Välkommen till Stora Aktiedagen här i Stockholm på hotell Birger. Idag är det den 1 december. Mitt namn är Peter Malmström och jag kommer att vara moderator under den här presentationen. Efter det att ni har lyssnat till Qlife så kommer jag att diskutera med Thomas Warthoe som är vd och co-founder av bolaget en del olika saker. Och det går också bra för er att ställa frågor genom att skicka in dem, och hur man gör det kommer att stå på skärmen. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
We're looking forward to hear about Qlife.
Sure.
The floor is yours.
Thank
Please
you.
Go ahead.
Hello everyone, my name is Thomas Warthoe. I'm the CEO of Qlife. Qlife is a company on a mission to bring blood biomarker testing into more decentralized locations and eventually into the homes of ordinary people, so that you can sit at home and measure blood biomarkers that may be relevant for a disease or a condition that you may have. So our aim is to make clinical biomarker data easily and quickly accessible. Healthcare systems all over the world are under pressure. We all live longer lives, and that's a good thing. But it also means that there are more diseases that needs to be treated. And more diseases means more diagnosis. More diagnosis means more blood biomarker testing. And that's resource demanding. And you know, when you have your blood taken, you have to go to the institution. They have to draw blood from your arm. They have to send it into the lab. They have to give you the results in a couple of days where you have to come back. And all of this, we at Qlife are proposing to make much more decentral and essentially have you to do the actual testing in your home. I usually say, what is more scalable than having people doing the testing themselves? We also see this mega trend of people that has a chronic disease, that they want to have more control over their disease in order to ease the pain. My own wife, actually, she has some level of arthritis in her back, and I definitely know that she's experimenting with what she eats, physiotherapy, she's eating different types of supplements, she's exercising in different ways. I'm in the fortunate position that I actually can help her with this little device here so that we can measure some blood biomarkers related to her arthritis at home. And correlating what she does herself with the data we get from this little machine here actually helps her to have some level of self-empowerment. And that's really important for her, because that means that what she does, she can actually also have some real clinical grade data on it. And she can take that data to the doctor and they can have a discussion based on sort of a knowledge basis. We also see, as we all know, a growing trend in the undiagnosed market, lifestyle diseases. We all need to live healthier lives. We all know that diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and all of that, we need to avoid that. But in order really to understand if we are approaching such a disease, it would be extremely helpful to have a tool that can give you actual data that tells you whether you are close to, for instance, being in the pre-diabetes stage, or if you're actually approaching a type 2 diabetes, something that you should definitely avoid. But today there are no tools to actually know if you are close to that. And at Qlife we are proposing to provide you with those tools. Now the system that we have developed over the past 20 years, although the company is only 3 years old, it's knowledge that has been built for a long time. And the system looks like this. It looks big here on the screen, but it's actually quite small. I brought it with me here. It looks like this. We think it's something that people would be willing to have at home, maybe at the night table, maybe in the bathroom or whatever. And although it's quite small, it's actually a very advanced technically system. And it's also a cloud-based system. And being a cloud-based system gives you certain advantages. For instance, when we need to upgrade with new firmware or other types of software, we can access the devices over the internet. And that's really important for our business model, because we expect eventually to have, in the 1,000, 10,000 of devices out there. And therefore it's important that we don't have to physically have access to all of them. We can do it over the internet. Another interesting feature is that as a person uses our device and accumulate more data, we can in the future actually apply certain software tools such as machine learning or artificial intelligence to the data, correlate it with other types of lifestyle data, and then we can provide not diagnosis but prognosis and risk stratification related to your chances for having a certain disease in the future. That's not something we're doing today, but it's something that this system proposes to do in the future. So, to summarize how it works, this system here works from a drop of blood, or it works from a swab in the throat or in the lower nasal. We have all come to learn how that works with COVID. And it measures either DNA, RNA, or protein. So essentially, I usually say up to around 80% of all biomarkers in blood or saliva or in other types of bodily fluid. Once you have the specimen, you enter it into the capsule goes into the device, and the device starts to generate raw data. The raw data goes into the cloud, and between 2 to 30 minutes later, you have the data on your smartphone. Now, so whether you are an old man that have type 2 diabetes, whether you are a young kid that is born with a genetic disease, whether you just is one of these health fanatics that constantly want to measure your own health metrics in order to improve your performance, or whether you are a young person going to school or university and maybe feeling a little bit stressed out because the pressure is becoming too high, it could be relevant for you to measure your clinical grade data, because it will give you some status related to how you're feeling, and you can correlate your feelings with actual data. You know, in this world of where we are very data driven, I usually say that it's interesting that although we hear so much about data, ordinary people do not have access to the data that means the most to them, their actual physical body health data. And I think that's curious in this very modern world. It's something that Qlife is proposing to change, so you can actually start to use actual health data to improve your health forward. Now, for this presentation here, we have chosen to structure it so that I'm actually going to answer a few questions that we know that our shareholders has some interest in actually knowing what the status is of the company. So we have structured it so that I'm trying to respond to these questions. One of them is that what have Qlife been focused on during the past 12 months? Well, I would say that we have been focused on building an actual company, from being an R&D company to becoming an actual operational company. And we chose 18 months ago around to jump on the COVID bandwagon just like anyone else. And I think we have actually gained quite a lot from that. We have transformed the company into having all these different aspects of being an operational company: sales, production, regulatory, etc., etc. We have generated 35 million Swedish krona in sales during the last 12 months. We have also built our technical dossier related to bringing IVDR product to the market, which is something which today has become quite complicated. When we went public, the status of the regulation was that you were adhering to what was called IVDD, the in vitro diagnostic directive, and since then it has changed to become IVDR, an in vitro diagnostic regulation, and that's a lot more complicated, and the demands has become a little bit in Europe similar to what they are in the United States under the FDA. So the past 12 months, we have built an organization which can fulfill all these requirements, which includes building software documentation, which is quite heavy on this system here, because it is actually a very heavy software system. There's a lot of software in it. And then we have built a production, and production validation is also another big thing when you want to have an IVDR product on the market. So for the next 12 months, what are we going to do? Well, we are focused on building CE protocols for the next 2 biomarkers that we bring to market. which are CRP, C-reactive protein, which is this all-round biomarker that tells you something about your disease progression, inflammation status. And it's also the biomarker that the general practitioner use the most when you come in. Do you have a virus or a bacteria infection? Should you have antibiotics or not? This biomarker we are proposing to bring into the homes of people so that you can sit at home and measure your CRP level. And we also focused on a biomarker that's called PKU. It's a genetic disease that typically hits especially young children and teenagers. They are born with a genetic deficiency. They cannot digest proteins. So these two biomarkers, we are going to update our technical dossier, creating the protocols, all the analytical data. We are setting up pilot production. And in order to achieve a CE mark, we need to run for each of them around 12,000 of our capsules under the new IVDR. We used to have, when we did the first CE mark, we used to only spend around 1,200. So it's about 10 times up in terms of how much analytical data we have to do for each biomarker. And then we will do the IVDR submission, and no, you can no longer do what's called a self-certification. You have to send in the dossier, and then the notified body, the authority, has up to 6 months to approve. And then, of course, we will launch the product. And at this stage here, we also, at this time, starting to consider what are the next types of biomarkers that we should focus on. So we are proposing to bring 2 biomarkers to the market next year. We will have the CRP available, or we will have it ready for submission to the notified body in October 22, and then they have 6 months. And we will have the PKU biomarker ready in December of 22, and then they have 6 months before we get the approval. So how many biomarkers will Qlife launch over the next 5 years? Well, one thing I do want to stress here today is that fundamentally, what we have spent the time on is to build our technical dossier, which is the foundation for the platform. That has taken a little bit longer than we actually expected due to the reasons I just explained. But now that we are close to having that, we expect that the next biomarkers will be somewhat easier. We still have to do all the analytical data and the clinical studies, but the fundament of the platform is done. So we are expecting to be able to bring 1 to 2 biomarkers to the market for home testing over 18-month period. So in total, over the next 5 years, up to around between 5 to 10 biomarkers over 5 years. We do have a COVID PCR test on the market. That test is approved for professional use. We were originally intending to also to bring it into home use, but we have stopped that because we are a little bit uncertain on the market potential for a home use PCR test due to all this antigen testing, which is now relatively popular, and we need to prioritize our resources. But it's certainly something that we are considering whether we should reignite that at some point, and it is possible that we will be able to obtain external financing to continue that development. Now, in terms of our production volumes, for the past 12 months, it looks like this. We were from Q1 to Q4 last year planning to produce 150 devices in Q1 and 600 in Q4. We actually produced, as you can see here, 80, 100, and 150, 250 over the 4 quarters. So a little less than actually was planned. In terms of capsules, we were pretty much on target, and here in Q4 we are at around 40,000 capsules. So that means a COVID PCR test. 40,000 in Q4, which was also our target. What we are planning to do in the future in order to upscale production is that we will hit around 20,000 capsules per month here from January. Then we are going into a two-way shift, and we are replicating our production lines. And in parallel with that, we are adding some semi-automation functionalities to these production lines, which means that we, around Q3 next year, should be able to have an output per month of around 150,000 capsules, which is, that's pretty much our target. And in parallel with that also, we are focused on a projection for a full automation plant where we can output up to quite a lot more. In terms of the devices, we have outsourced the device to a production partner, and that's going very well. We are already at this time, we have outsourced 2 of the module. The device here is divided into 6 modules, and this contractual partner is now producing 2 of the modules, and the plan looks like this. And we are expecting that towards the end of next year, the partner will be able to produce all of the modules, assemble the device, and do what we call box build, so that we at Qlife actually never will see the product, but it will be shipped directly from them to the customer. Then also, there has been some questions on our collaboration with our sales partner, ADRIAN. It is correct that we got off to a little bit of a slow start with ADRIAN. There's many reasons for that. Among others, we had to translate our manuals into 12 different languages because the rules are that you cannot launch a product in a local market unless it's in the original language. And there were also some software and data integration to public system that needed to be done. But nevertheless, when ADRIAN went to market, they went into the clinical space, and that was around summer of last year. And what we found was that the market was a little bit saturated in hospitals, etc., with other types of more clinically based systems. Since then, ADRIAN has been focused on more decentralized locations. And what I can say about this collaboration today is that, in my mind, it looks very positive. They are definitely doing a lot of progress. And although it has been a little bit slow, we are optimistic that it from now on will evolve positively. Today, ADRIAN is representing us in 18 different markets. But actually, most of our sales, 80% of our sales is actually here in Sweden. And the rest, 20%, is in Germany and a few other countries. In terms of our view on how the market for home use blood testing will develop, I can only say that we think that Qlife is on a trend that will only grow from here on. We think that blood testing is something that's a big need for moving away from the hospitals, institutions, and everywhere where you're doing blood testing, and then get it into more decentralized locations. And this is also what many reports is emphasizing. There is a need for decentralization of blood biomarker testing. It is true that the IVDR regulation has made it much more difficult. But on the other hand, you can also say from Qlife perspective, we have now gone through this period of time where we have spent so many resources to bring ourselves in a position where we now actually can execute on this business model. So we actually think we are in a quite good position in order to be a first mover in that market. So I shown this slide before. I think we believe we structured our upscaling journey in these 4 boxes. And at this time here, we believe that we have fulfilled the 2 first ones. We have gone to market with our COVID product. We have built productions. We have entered into relationship with several key opinion leaders. We have built revenues, and as an organization, we are functioning quite well at this time. And in the future, we will be focused on going into this PKU field, which is a very well-defined field for people that need to have blood testing at home basically every day. We will prove our system there. And of course, we will get a lot of experiences with transfer data into the relevant databases, public databases, and we will get experience from these PKU users, can they actually understand how to use our system, and if not, how do we have to improve the system? In terms of our IP, there have been some questions on that. Qlife has 2 fundamental IPs. Both of them were originally filed in Denmark. One of them has been issued in Denmark. The other one is close to being issued. And of course, both of them are now in what is called the PCT system, the international system, where we are, of course, focused on worldwide protection. And of course, initially, you are taking it further into the biggest countries. And that is exactly what is happening now under this PCT system. We were for a long time involved in COVID testing. We were the company in Denmark that were having all the professional sports, the Superliga, the Nordic Liga, handball, ice hockey, badminton. We also had some ice hockey clubs here in Sweden, and we did a lot of laboratory testing. But we are no longer involved in laboratory testing. It's not fundamental to our business model. Qlife is focusing on this little system here, Ego Health system, and we are currently in a transition to sell this system and entirely only focus on that. And that's also interesting. That's an interesting point when you are looking at our revenue, because it looks like this for the past 12 months. In Q1, we had revenues around 10-11 million Swedish kroner. All of that was based on laboratory testing. Q2, also around 10-11, and that was also based on laboratory testing. Then we had a dip in the revenue for Q3, but all of this was actually based on sales of our Ego Health system. So that transition period, although we saw this dip in revenue, we transitioned relatively well, and I'm happy to say that we actually did get around 6 million in sales, only from sales of our COVID system. And here in Q4, of course, I'm not allowed to provide any prognosis on numbers, but we are certainly seeing that things are moving in the right direction. So, to summarize, we think that Qlife is in very good shape. We have been successful in the transition from the IVDD to the IVDR. The foundation for the future has been built. We have transitioned from revenues from laboratory-based COVID testing to Ego Health COVID testing. And we think the company is very well positioned to be a first mover in the home use self-testing of clinical biomarker data. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas.
Sure.
Very interesting, very complete presentation.
Thank you.
But as always, there are listeners, investors who would like to pose you a few questions, and I've gotten some of them here, and I think we will get some on the screen as well. But let me start by asking you, when you talk to doctors about your product, the Ego, what are the hurdles? Is it hard to convince them? Do they stress that the product is not safe? Or what are the comments that you get?
We definitely see that one of the big barriers is actually to convince, especially the GPs, the general practitioners, that people should sit at home and test clinical grade biomarkers, because doctors, they have economical reasons to keep it in the office, but they're also a little bit uncertain whether this is a good idea or not, and maybe with good reason. But we think that eventually we actually seeing a younger generation of GPs that are much more tech savvy and much more interested in having the patients more involved in the monitoring of their condition. So we think it's something that we need to build together with the general practitioners, and eventually we think that they will be convinced as well.
One thing might be that they feel that the customer, the patient, has gotten all the information him or herself, and they're cutting me out, sort of.
Yeah, it's very true. But then again, I think they should maybe start to accept that, because I think it's a good thing. And as I said before, having a patient talk from a basis of knowledge as opposed to feelings is I think, a good thing. And it should be something that could alleviate all the pressure on the GPs. So I think in the longer run, it's something that they also will have to accept.
Yeah. Are there any clinical benefits using your products?
So what we are doing is not creating new biomarkers. We are essentially moving biomarkers that are very well known and that everybody are using. I usually joke a little bit and say that we are a logistical company, because all we do is that we move the location from where the biomarker or the blood is taken from being in a central location to a decentral location. So there's nothing new in it. But there's a lot of savings associated to having people being able to do the testing themselves. And then, of course, we never provide diagnosis. We are monitoring people with this device. And then when they meet the doctor already has the data, and they can start already there to discuss, what is the diagnosis. The diagnosis, just to stress that, is always up to the doctor.
Always up to the doctor.
Yeah.
That's important to remember.
That's very important, yes.
Yeah. Okay. We have a number of investors here today. We have a number of investors looking at us via the web. Why should an investor include Qlife in his or her portfolio?
Well, I definitely think they should.
Yeah, but why should they, Thomas?
Yeah, because I think that the trend that we are sort of riding, or the wave that we are riding, is something that societies maybe already are realizing, and certainly will have to realize, that people need to be more involved in their own disease, because it's going to be too expensive for healthcare systems to carry all that relative routine work. And then once the routine work via someone like us is done very decentral, then the doctors and professors and all of the clinical staff can focus on what's really important, curing the diseases. So I think it's a trend that has come to stay and that will only grow. And that growth, of course, will be mirrored in our revenues. So that's why they should invest.
Okay. One final question before we finish here. In the beginning of November, you made an announcement that you were going to present an article in Scientific Reports. Have you gotten any positive response from that article, that announcement?
That article is published in Scientific Reports, which is an associated journal to Nature. So we are actually quite proud of having that published, and it is published. So it's publicly available.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming here. Very interesting, and we will keep on following you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Då